Ecclesiastes this morning, and basically Ecclesiastes translates to the professor or the teacher or the minister or the pundit, and it's most likely that Solomon wrote this. It's not explicitly stated that he does, but who else could make the comments that we see in these chapters other than Solomon? And Solomon is trying to figure out the riddle of life. What makes sense of life? Is there life before death? I think what our culture today focuses on is there life after death? But Solomon's taking the opposite approach this morning. Is there life before death? And he's searching for answers from a completely secular view. The scripture, that translation that we have before us, I searched everything under heaven. Other translations will say, I searched everything under the sun. That's to let us know that what he is evaluating, he is not considering at this point any divinity or God or anything like that. And we see that it starts out kind of sad or pessimistic. And I think that one of the beauties of Scripture is nothing is sugar-coated, because when we look at what others who we may read or admire say about life, we can look to Hemingway. And Hemingway says, life's a dirty trick. You go from nothingness to nothingness. Or we look at certain philosophical viewpoints. We were born by chance. Everything that happens in life is by chance. Some people will miss you when you die, but the world will keep turning. And I don't think that any of us came here this morning with a type of pessimism or disgust with life and that it's pointless or meaningless to us. But as we come out of one year into a new year, and there's so much change going on in our world and maybe in our own lives, it's pretty standard for us to evaluate, what am I here for? Has my life made a difference? Do I have purpose? Some common questions we may ask ourselves to understand, why was this part of my life dark and ugly, and yet this other part of my life full of joy and security? And maybe when I hit my dream job or landed this accolade that I'd been after, there may have been a sense of, well, it wasn't everything that I thought it would be. So what Solomon does for us in the first two chapters of Ecclesiastes is say, I'm going to look at life and finding meaning in life by looking at four different categories. I'm going to look at wisdom first, and then I'm going to look at hedonism or pleasure, and then I'm going to look at cynicism and materialism. And in our scripture lesson this morning, we looked to what he says about wisdom. And he becomes disenchanted that wisdom cannot provide meaning for him. And he makes it clear that when it comes to wisdom, I'm as wise as they come. Remember from sermon point last year, the Queen of Sheba made us point to abandon her kingdom, to travel all across the desert, to come and meet with Solomon, to learn from the wisest person that existed on earth. And what Solomon is saying is, it wasn't enough. Having wisdom wasn't enough to change my character or my circumstances. And while education is important, because he even points out it's better to be wise than a fool. And when we look back to our Psalter this morning, Psalm 14 reminds us that only a fool doesn't believe in God. So we're not critical of education, but it does not provide everything we need. If it did, there'd be no way to get into colleges. Colleges would be full in the summer because people would take their vacations to come and get wisdom so that they would have a meaning in their life. Colleges would be places of peace and tranquility. And if we educate someone, then we change behavior forever. And we know that education is not enough to change behavior. We've seen it recently in our society. If we educate somebody, they won't do bad, they'll decide to do good. If we educate somebody not to smoke, they won't smoke because we've educated them. But we know it's not enough. And while we have so much benefits from knowledge, we can go to the moon. There's something about us that while we can find and conquer outer space, we have a trouble keeping the peace here on earth between ourselves. I think of Einstein often when people want to talk about knowledge, and I think two quotes of his are pertinent for our discussion this morning. Imagination is more important than knowledge. While knowledge provides the foundation for understanding, it is imagination that truly expands our horizons. And maybe even more on point for what we're talking about this morning. The difference between stupidity and genius is that genius has its limits. And I think that's what Solomon is telling us this morning. There's a lot of benefit to wisdom, but it's not going to provide everything we look for in life. Then he goes on to say, I tried pleasure. I undertook pleasure and denied myself nothing, is what the scripture says. Basically, he says that doesn't work either. He took a hedonism approach. Let the good times roll. Let's do what we want. I refused nothing. I wrote the rules, and the rules I didn't agree with, I broke them. And he says in the scripture, I had wine, women, and song. For a period in his life, he lived every moment like it was a Friday night. And we can look to other folks who have poetry in their blood. I think of Robert Burns. Robert Burns is a Scottish poet, maybe their most famous. You probably know one of his poems. It's the Should Old Acquaintance Be Forgot and Never Brought to Mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot, old lang syne? But he has another poem that says a lot of what Solomon is trying to explain to us this morning. And in his poem, Tam of the Chanter, he says, pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed. Or it's like the snowfall on a river, a moment white, then melts forever. The thing about chasing pleasure to be the fulfillment and meaning of life is it's immediately attractive, but as soon as you grasp it, it fades on you, and it's like watching snowfall get sucked up by a river and washed away. I think that's why we can identify with what so much of C.S. Lewis's comments mean to us. If C.S. Lewis says that if we find ourselves a desire which nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. We ought not say that this world is lousy, but that we were made for another world. So those are the first two things Solomon looks at. I was the wisest, and that is not satisfying. I sought pleasure, and that was not satisfying. I had a harem, I had gold, I had all the things that you could want at my disposal. And then he looks at cynicism. And we see a lot of cynicism in our society in that it's a natural response when we either don't understand something or something's not fulfilling. And I think that's where we see an atheist movement happen, because what Huxley says, and he's probably the most famous and outspoken atheist, he said, "To disregard God gave me the freedom to do what I wanted." But he became cynical in the end. And I think part of the popularity with Monty Python, especially their series The Flying Circus, was they made fun of everything. Nothing was off limits. But when nothing is off limits and you're making fun of disabilities and end-of-life issues, what happens is if you laugh at everything, nothing's funny. And cynicism sets in. So cynicism wasn't his answer either. And, you know, just to go one more point on that, we see clowns, and clowns always have a painted face. And a lot of people think that the reason a clown's face is painted is because they're some of the saddest people in the world. And there is a story of a psychiatrist who says, "I had a new patient. The person was in great despair and a bad state. And I've been working with the person and finally said, I don't know that I provided you any help, but you need some joy in your life. If you'll grab a newspaper, there's an Italian clown who's come to town who's selling out every venue in Manhattan. You should get a ticket and go have some laughter." To which the patient says, "I am that clown." So cynicism is not the answer. And then lastly, he looks at materialism. And he says, in all his day's work, he's had pain and grief. And can't we relate to that? When work is intense and hard, maybe we bring it home with us. Maybe it keeps us up at night. Maybe we get the Sunday night tummy aches. He is saying that whether it's wisdom, whether it's materialism, whether it's cynicism or hedonism, none of it has worked. And he should know the smartest, wealthiest, everything at his disposal. But he doesn't end Ecclesiastes 2 in pessimism or despair. He starts by saying this: "For who can eat, or who else hasten thereof more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom, and knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that which is good before God." So what he is telling us is it's sin that has caused all these things that he has mentioned to not bring enough joy and peace and meaning to a person's life, to where that is enough to provide fulfilling and meaning alone. If you're going to look for the meaning of life, it has to include God. It has to include a path in which God is God and we are a person. And when we know that God is God and we are who we are, and we know that he has plans to prosper us and make us well and keep us good, that this is the truth and the meaning that we're after. If we go alone, if we just look at what happens here under the sun and what we can do for ourselves, we'll always come up short. And that is the story of the Old Testament. When we look at the Old Testament, from the beginning to the end, it is a story of men and women who do not want to stay in the role that they were given, but want to be God themselves. It what led to the fall in the garden. in a place of perfection, people still wanted to be God. It's the problem we have today, either with the rebellion in our heart or the way that we can think, I can do this, or when I am able to get to this, then these things will happen for me, and I will be content, and I will be at peace. But what is the message this morning is, we all think we can do things for ourselves, and Solomon's saying, not in a complete way. It's only through God that these things are possible. And while that is the burden of sin, we do have good news starting when we look in places like Isaiah 53. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him, meaning Jesus, the inequity of us all. Sin spoils my life and separates me from God and the ones I love. Sin and desire to be God is the problems that plagued all the folks in the Old Testament. And God understands this, and he provided an answer for us, because the New Testament is about God coming down to the place of man. And we see that in the life and story of Jesus. And we understand Jesus' cry from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Is a very good question. I was perfect. I did nothing wrong. From start to finish, I was righteous. And here I hang on a tree. Even the criminal beside Jesus got the point. The man in the middle, who did not deserve what he is getting, is being punished, even though he is righteous. And I am up here getting what I deserve. We're different. And the man in the middle has spent his life preaching that I will give you life, that I will take what you deserve as the burden on myself. To which he says, maybe I should follow this guy. And he says, can you remember me when you come into your kingdom? And Jesus says, I'll do you one better than that. You'll be with me today in paradise. If we're looking to obtain or possess things in this life, we will never have full meaning. But where we will find the meaning of our lives is in evolving and becoming something new, something different, something a sinner can only become through the grace of God and God's help. All good things start in heaven, and any good thing that comes to your life is a gift from God. And that's the good news this morning. Thank you.